A morning mist hung low over the rolling hills and dense jungles of South Vietnam as another day of war quietly began, concealing beneath its silence a conflict that had already consumed thousands of lives and would ultimately reshape the history of the United States. Somewhere beyond the thick canopy, hidden by layers of bamboo, elephant grass, and ancient trees, North Vietnamese soldiers and Viet Cong guerrillas waited with extraordinary patience, confident that the jungle itself was their greatest ally. For the young American Marines moving cautiously through that unforgiving landscape, every step carried uncertainty, every shadow invited suspicion, and every sound had the potential to become the last thing they would ever hear. The Vietnam War was unlike any conflict the United States had previously fought. There were no clearly defined front lines stretching across maps, no massive armored formations colliding on open battlefields, and few opportunities to distinguish friend from foe with complete certainty. Instead, survival depended upon discipline, observation, and an ability to remain calm in an environment where danger was often invisible until it was far too late. Amid this relentless uncertainty, stories began circulating among American units about a Marine whose extraordinary patience and uncanny accuracy seemed almost beyond explanation. Those stories would eventually spread far beyond the ranks of the United States Marine Corps, reaching enemy commanders who placed an enormous bounty on his life and ordered their own elite marksmen to hunt him down. His name was Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Norman Hathcock II, though throughout Vietnam he became known by a far more memorable title, the White Feather. Long after the war ended, military historians would continue to study his missions, his methods, and the profound influence he had on modern sniper doctrine, recognizing that his legacy extended far beyond the impressive number of confirmed kills credited to his name. His story was never simply about marksmanship. It was about discipline, restraint, psychological endurance, and an understanding of warfare that few soldiers have ever possessed. To appreciate how Carlos Hathcock became one of the most respected snipers in American military history, it is necessary to begin far from the battlefields of Southeast Asia, in a world that could not have appeared more different from the steaming jungles where his reputation would eventually be forged. Hathcock was born on May 20, 1942, in Little Rock, Arkansas, during the height of the Second World War, a period when the United States was mobilizing millions of young men to fight across Europe and the Pacific. His early childhood, however, was defined not by military glory but by hardship. His parents separated when he was still very young, and much of his upbringing took place in the modest surroundings of Wynne, Arkansas, where he lived with his grandmother under circumstances that required every member of the family to contribute however they could. Hunting was not viewed as recreation or sport. It represented food on the dinner table, and for a young boy growing up with limited resources, success in the woods could determine whether the family enjoyed a substantial meal or endured another difficult week. Long before he ever imagined wearing the uniform of the United States Marine Corps, Carlos developed an intimate relationship with nature that would unknowingly prepare him for one of history's most demanding battlefields. He learned how to move quietly through dense forests without disturbing wildlife, how to recognize subtle signs left by animals, how shifting winds altered scent and sound, and how absolute stillness often accomplished more than restless movement. These were lessons that no formal military academy could teach, yet they would later become fundamental to his extraordinary effectiveness as a scout sniper operating in Vietnam. Unlike many children who quickly lost patience when sitting motionless outdoors, Hathcock possessed an unusually calm temperament from an early age. Friends and family would later remember that he could spend countless hours observing the woods around him without complaint, studying every movement with quiet concentration while other boys his age searched for excitement elsewhere. This remarkable patience gradually evolved into exceptional shooting ability, not because he fired countless rounds but because every shot demanded careful consideration before he pulled the trigger. He learned instinctively that accuracy mattered far more than speed and that confidence came from preparation rather than impulse. These principles became deeply ingrained long before he understood how valuable they would become in combat. Throughout his youth, another dream quietly took shape alongside his growing love of hunting. Inspired by stories of American servicemen returning from World War II and the Korean War, Hathcock became fascinated by the United States Marine Corps, an institution whose emphasis on discipline, professionalism, and marksmanship matched many of the values he had already embraced. To him, Becoming a Marine represented far more than simply joining the military. It offered an opportunity to dedicate himself completely to excellence in a profession that demanded both physical endurance and unwavering mental strength. When Hathcock enlisted in the Marine Corps at the age of 17, his instructors quickly discovered what years of hunting in rural Arkansas had already taught him. He possessed extraordinary natural shooting ability that stood apart even within an organization famous for emphasizing marksmanship. Every Marine was expected to become proficient with a rifle, yet proficiency alone could not explain what instructors observed whenever Hathcock stepped onto the firing range. His breathing remained steady under pressure, his trigger control appeared almost effortless, and his understanding of sight alignment and wind conditions exceeded that of many far more experienced shooters. More importantly, he displayed none of the overconfidence that often accompanies exceptional talent. Fellow Marines would later describe him as remarkably humble, a quiet individual who rarely sought attention and preferred allowing his performance to speak for itself. Rather than treating shooting as an opportunity to impress others, he approached it with the mindset of a craftsman dedicated to mastering every detail, believing that perfection resulted not from natural ability alone, but from endless repetition, careful observation, and relentless self-discipline. Those qualities earned him increasing recognition within competitive shooting circles, where he consistently demonstrated an ability to perform under conditions that challenged even the nation's finest marksmen. That reputation reached a defining moment in 1965 when Hathcock competed in the prestigious Wimbledon Cup match at Camp Perry, Ohio, one of the most respected long-range shooting competitions in the United States. Facing many of the country's best military and civilian marksmen, he delivered a performance that confirmed what experienced instructors had suspected for years. His victory in the Wimbledon Cup established him as one of America's premier rifle shooters and attracted considerable attention within the Marine Corps. Yet even after achieving such remarkable success, Hathcock remained remarkably unchanged. Unlike competitors motivated by trophies or public recognition, he viewed each competition primarily as an opportunity to refine his skills. Winning mattered because it demonstrated that countless hours of preparation had produced measurable results, not because it brought fame. This quiet professionalism would later define his approach to combat, where unnecessary risks and displays of bravado often proved fatal. Hathcock understood that genuine confidence required neither loud words nor dramatic gestures. It revealed itself through consistency, discipline, and the ability to remain calm when circumstances became most dangerous. Only months after earning national recognition as a marksman, Hathcock received orders that would forever alter the course of his life. The conflict in Vietnam had expanded rapidly following increased American military involvement, and thousands of Marines were deploying to Southeast Asia each year. Public understanding of the war remained limited, and many young servicemen believed they were entering another conventional military campaign in which superior training, equipment, and firepower would quickly secure victory. The reality awaiting them proved profoundly different. Vietnam challenged nearly every assumption American military planners had developed during previous conflicts. Instead of facing an enemy eager to fight large-scale battles in open terrain, American forces confronted opponents who understood every aspect of the local environment and used that knowledge to extraordinary advantage. Thick jungles concealed movement, dense vegetation disrupted visibility, and an elaborate network of tunnels allowed enemy forces to appear and disappear with remarkable speed. The battlefield itself seemed alive, constantly shifting between periods of unsettling silence and sudden explosions of violence that left little time for reaction. Even experienced Marines found the psychological strain exhausting, for every routine patrol carried the possibility of ambush, every abandoned trail might conceal carefully placed booby traps, and every seemingly peaceful village demanded cautious observation before trust could be established. When Carlos Hathcock first arrived in Vietnam in 1966, he entered this unfamiliar world not as the legendary sniper history would later celebrate, but simply as another Marine fulfilling his duty in an increasingly complex war. Initially assigned as a military policeman, he performed his responsibilities professionally, yet his exceptional marksmanship did not remain unnoticed for long. Senior Marine leaders recognized that the Corps required highly skilled shooters capable of conducting specialized reconnaissance and precision engagements against enemy officers, machine gun crews, and other high-value targets whose elimination could significantly influence battlefield operations. During this period, the Marine Corps was actively developing and expanding its Scout Sniper program, recognizing that carefully selected marksmen could provide an invaluable advantage in Vietnam's unique combat environment. Hathcock's remarkable competitive shooting record, combined with his calm temperament and exceptional fieldcraft, made him an ideal candidate for this demanding role. Once reassigned as a Scout Sniper, he entered a profession unlike any other within the Marine Corps, one that demanded extraordinary physical endurance, emotional resilience, and the willingness to spend days isolated deep inside hostile territory with only a single partner for support. Few military assignments required greater patience than that of a Marine Scout Sniper operating in Vietnam. Unlike conventional infantry units, which often maneuvered in platoons or companies, sniper teams typically consisted of only two men, the sniper and his spotter, who relied almost entirely upon stealth rather than firepower for survival. Their missions frequently required them to crawl through dense vegetation for hours, sometimes advancing only a few hundred yards during an entire day in order to avoid detection. They carried limited food, precious supplies of water, and ammunition carefully protected from the relentless humidity that permeated every corner of the jungle. Radio communication remained restricted because unnecessary transmissions could reveal their position, leaving them isolated from friendly forces should circumstances suddenly deteriorate. Every movement demanded careful planning, every observation required absolute concentration, and every decision carried consequences measured not merely in mission success but in survival itself. For most Marines, such conditions represented extraordinary hardship. For Carlos Hathcock, however, they represented the perfect environment in which the lessons learned during countless solitary hunts in the forests of Arkansas could finally be applied on history's most unforgiving stage. During his first weeks serving as a Marine Scout Sniper, Carlos Hathcock quickly discovered that success in Vietnam depended far less on extraordinary marksmanship than on mastering the invisible contest that unfolded long before a rifle was ever fired. Every mission began with intelligence gathered from reconnaissance aircraft, patrol reports, intercepted communications, or observations made by Marines who had narrowly survived previous encounters with the enemy. Once an objective had been identified, Hathcock and his spotter would begin planning an approach that often required them to exploit every fold in the terrain, every patch of vegetation, and every natural shadow capable of concealing human movement. The distances they traveled were not always remarkable, but the time required to cover them often astonished those unfamiliar with sniper operations. A journey of several hundred yards could consume an entire day as they crawled inch by inch through mud, rice paddies, thorn-covered undergrowth, and dense jungle, freezing motionless whenever the slightest indication suggested that enemy soldiers might be watching. The tropical heat was relentless. Humidity soaked every layer of clothing within minutes. Insects swarmed constantly around exposed skin, and leeches attached themselves silently whenever an opportunity presented itself. Yet none of these discomforts could be allowed to distract attention from the mission. In Vietnam, impatience killed far more effectively than exhaustion. A single careless movement, the glint of sunlight reflecting from a rifle scope, or the instinctive reaction to brush away a mosquito could reveal a sniper's position and transform hunter into hunted within seconds. The environment itself became one of Hathcock's greatest teachers, forcing him to refine skills that had already begun developing during his childhood in Arkansas, but now required absolute perfection under life-threatening conditions. Every sound carried meaning. The sudden silence of birds frequently indicated that something had disturbed the jungle long before any human figure became visible. Monkeys reacting nervously in the trees could reveal approaching patrols. Even the direction in which grass bent after rainfall offered clues about recent movement through an area. Hathcock gradually developed an extraordinary sensitivity to these subtle details, understanding that the battlefield constantly communicated information to those patient enough to observe it. Unlike many soldiers who focused exclusively on locating the enemy, he learned to study the landscape itself, recognizing that nature often revealed human presence long before direct visual contact became possible. Fellow Marines later recalled that he seemed capable of noticing details invisible to everyone else, detecting faint disturbances in vegetation or slight irregularities in terrain that eventually proved to be concealed fighting positions, recently traveled paths, or carefully camouflaged observation posts. Such abilities were not supernatural, despite the legends that would later surround his name, but the result of years spent cultivating habits of observation that most people never fully develop. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Hathcock's approach to warfare was his extraordinary restraint. Contrary to popular portrayals of military snipers in films and novels, success was never measured by the number of rounds fired during a mission. In fact, many of his patrols ended without a single shot being taken because no opportunity justified exposing his position. Hathcock understood that every trigger pull represented the conclusion of a lengthy process rather than its beginning. Before firing, he carefully evaluated wind direction, distance, lighting conditions, possible escape routes, and the likelihood that additional enemy forces might already be watching the intended target. If uncertainty remained, he simply waited. This patience frustrated younger Marines eager for action, yet experienced officers recognized that his disciplined judgment consistently preserved both missions and lives. His rifle was not an instrument of impulse but the final expression of careful planning, and this philosophy soon distinguished him from nearly every other marksman operating in the theater. It also contributed significantly to his remarkable survival, for each unnecessary shot increased the probability that enemy forces would locate and eliminate the sniper responsible. As weeks turned into months, Hathcock's reputation spread quietly throughout Marine units operating near Da Nang and other contested regions. Officers requesting sniper support increasingly asked for him by name, recognizing that his presence often altered the outcome of difficult operations without requiring large-scale engagements. Enemy machine gun positions that had pinned down advancing Marines for hours could suddenly fall silent after a single precisely placed round. Commanders directing North Vietnamese units sometimes disappeared moments before planned attacks commenced, disrupting carefully organized assaults and creating confusion among troops accustomed to centralized leadership. On numerous occasions, Marines advancing through hazardous terrain discovered that the most dangerous threats had already been neutralized before they reached effective engagement range. Those who served alongside Hathcock frequently remarked that his greatest contribution extended beyond the targets he eliminated. His calm presence inspired confidence throughout nearby units because Marines understood that someone possessing exceptional patience and judgment was constantly watching over them from concealed positions they themselves could rarely identify. While admiration for Hathcock steadily increased among American forces, an equally profound transformation was occurring within the ranks of the North Vietnamese Army, and the Viet Cong reports describing an American sniper capable of extraordinary accuracy began circulating among field commanders responsible for operations in areas where Marine Scout snipers were particularly active. At first, such stories resembled the exaggerations common to every war, yet repeated encounters gradually convinced experienced officers that they faced an unusually dangerous opponent. Survivors described comrades collapsing without warning while marching through seemingly secure territory, officers being struck moments after exposing themselves to direct troop movements, and carefully concealed observation posts becoming compromised despite extensive camouflage. Although enemy forces possessed skilled marksmen of their own, few demonstrated the consistency or discipline associated with the mysterious Marine whose activities repeatedly disrupted military operations. As the story spread, they became increasingly embellished, evolving into battlefield folklore that portrayed Hathcock as an almost invisible hunter capable of remaining hidden indefinitely before striking at precisely the right moment. Such legends naturally exaggerated reality, but they also reflected the psychological impact his operations produced among those forced to confront the possibility that they themselves might become his next target. One small personal habit unexpectedly contributed to this growing reputation. Hathcock occasionally wore a white feather tucked into the band of his camouflage hat, a simple gesture that carried little significance for him personally but quickly attracted attention among both friend and foe. Exactly how consistently he wore the feather has been debated by historians, with some veterans recalling that it appeared only occasionally while others remembered it more frequently. What remains beyond dispute, however, is that enemy soldiers eventually associated the image of the white feather with the elusive Marine sniper whose effectiveness had become increasingly difficult to ignore. The nickname White Feather soon emerged within North Vietnamese circles and gradually spread throughout the battlefield, transforming an ordinary decorative object into one of the most recognizable symbols of the Vietnam War. Ironically, the very characteristic that might have endangered another sniper instead reinforced Hathcock's growing psychological influence. The feather became less an identifying marker than a powerful reminder that the American they feared most could be watching from virtually anywhere, whether the feather itself was actually visible or not. The psychological dimension of sniping fascinated military planners because its effects frequently extended far beyond immediate casualties. Hathcock understood, perhaps instinctively, that fear often disrupted military effectiveness more profoundly than physical losses alone. Soldiers who believed they were constantly being observed moved more cautiously, delayed operations, hesitated before exposing themselves, and devoted valuable attention to searching for threats that remained invisible. Commanders became reluctant to occupy exposed positions from which they could effectively direct their troops. Patrols advanced more slowly, reducing operational tempo and allowing American forces additional time to prepare defensive positions or conduct reconnaissance. In this respect, the carefully selected elimination of a single individual occasionally produced consequences far exceeding what large volumes of indiscriminate fire could achieve. Hathcock never viewed sniping as an exercise in accumulating personal achievements. Rather, he regarded every mission as part of a broader military objective designed to protect fellow Marines and weaken enemy capabilities with the minimum necessary use of force. This disciplined perspective distinguished him from sensationalized portrayals that emerged after the war and explains why so many professional military instructors continue studying his methods decades later. Yet, despite his growing fame among those who served beside him, Carlos Hathcock remained remarkably unchanged as an individual. Veterans consistently described him as soft-spoken, approachable, and almost uncomfortable with public attention. He rarely discussed his accomplishments unless directly questioned and often redirected praise toward fellow Marines who had participated in the same operations. His spotters, whose responsibilities included calculating distances, observing impacts, monitoring surrounding terrain, and providing security, understood that every successful mission depended upon complete trust between two men operating under extraordinary pressure. Hathcock never portrayed himself as a solitary hero because he recognized that survival in Vietnam resulted from teamwork, preparation, and mutual confidence rather than individual brilliance alone. This humility earned deep respect throughout the Marine Corps, where exaggerated stories of personal heroism were often viewed with skepticism. Those who genuinely knew Hathcock rarely remembered dramatic speeches or boasts. Instead, they remembered a professional who approached every assignment with quiet seriousness, never allowing previous success to diminish the caution required by the next mission. As his operational experience expanded, Marine commanders increasingly entrusted Hathcock with missions requiring exceptional precision and discretion. These assignments frequently involved penetrating deep into enemy-controlled territory to observe supply routes, identify command positions, or engage carefully selected targets whose removal could influence broader military operations. Such missions carried extraordinary risks because rescue was often impossible should a sniper team become compromised far behind enemy lines. Every decision, therefore, demanded not only courage but disciplined judgment regarding when to continue, when to withdraw, and when accomplishing the mission no longer justified the danger involved. Hathcock repeatedly demonstrated an unusual ability to balance aggression with restraint, advancing boldly when circumstances favored success, while remaining entirely willing to abandon opportunities that exposed unnecessary risk. This combination of confidence and caution would soon be tested during missions that have since become among the most studied sniper operations in modern military history, encounters that would elevate his reputation from respected Marine marksman to enduring legend within the annals of American military history.